Hey everyone, today I'm going to do a tier ranking of the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I just recently finished Battleground about a week and a half, which makes, as I'm filming this, me caught up in the series. This is an interesting series for me because it took me 5 years to get through all of these books, although half of them were within the last calendar year. In fact, I think half of them, I think I've read 9 of them in the last 9 months. So it got really good for me. And that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do a tier ranking, because I'm sure there's great tier rankings out there from people that have read the series multiple times and know the intricacies of a lot of the things, how they tie together and so forth. But I wanted to give this tier ranking for a couple reasons. One, just to add to the Dresden chatter as the new book is coming out in January, but also just to kind of demonstrate my journey through the series, because there were 3 different times that I almost quit the series. In fact, one of the times I thought I had totally quit the series. And just seeing kind of the trajectory of this series, you're going to see the peaks and the valleys of these books, because it is a bit inconsistent, especially early on. But for me, what I found is that the highs really outweigh the lows big time, because the highs in this series are some of the best things that I've read in the genre, and it's something that I really enjoy. So I'm going to do this tier ranking. I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. In fact, let's just call it spoiler-free. I did make some notes for some things just to make sure that I don't forget things, but also I wrote down a couple ways to say things that are maybe a bit more spoiler-free, but will also allude to those of you that have read the series, that you know what I'm talking about. Because I do want to provide this as a bit of a service for people that maybe are early in the series or haven't started the series, just so that they know, hey, this series doesn't start that great. But again, the highs just outweigh the lows big time, and it's a series that I've grown to love. So here we go. Here's my spoiler-free tier ranking of the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. All right, here we go. I think I have this set up right now. I had to do a false start. Anyway, you see the tiers over there, S, A, B, C, D. That's not the normal tiers I usually do on a tier ranking list. A lot of times I do best of the best, outstanding, good to great, mid, skip it are my normal 5 tiers. But I didn't want to create a new tier maker, and there was one on the tier maker website already, and actually Jake Bishop made this one. So I just had to add Battleground, so he must have done this before that book was out. But anyway, we're going to go through again. I'm going to keep it spoiler-free, but let's start with Stormfront. So Stormfront for me was a bit of a disappointment. I was really excited. I just started watching BookTube for consistently about the time that I picked this book up, and I was really excited. Everybody raved about the Dresden Files, and I was so excited. Additionally, I used to be in a book club when I lived in Dallas, and my friends in that book club, this was during pandemic that we read this together, 2020. They started meeting again virtually, so I was meeting up with them. I convinced them to read Stormfront, said, oh, this is low fantasy. It's kind of a wizard kind of crime noir, and everyone raves about it. Let's read it together. And lo and behold, we were all disappointed by it. I called it a great mystery for people who don't read mysteries, because it was kind of predictable if you know the noir kind of setup and all of the tropes. I predicted one of the endings like as early as chapter 2. So I was a bit disappointed with Stormfront. Additionally, none of us really, we didn't like the male gaze that is very strong in this book and very strong in a lot of the books in the series. So kind of a little disclaimer. But Stormfront wasn't the best start to the series. I'm going to put it in kind of my mid-tier with the C. But I liked the world building. We all liked the world building. We were intrigued about what this White Council was going to look like and all of that. So it was something that, even though I kind of stopped the series right there, I said, maybe I'll pick it up later. Well, I did pick up Full Moon about 6 months later. And unfortunately, Full Moon is a big step downward. And I think most Dresden fans put Full Moon as their least favorite of all of them. It was less predictable in the first book. I liked that part of it, but it was kind of dull. And this is where I really thought I was done with the series. And it probably wasn't for at least 6 months or more, maybe even as much as a year, before I picked up the next one, which is Grave Peril. And this was just, I wasn't planning on continuing the series, but I was shopping at the Book People, which is our big independent bookstore here in Austin, Texas. And it's in the fantasy section. I looked down and, hey, there's Grave Peril. And I read the back flap and I said, maybe I'll give it one more shot. I mean, people love this series. I knew going in the second book wasn't going to be the strongest. So I picked up Grave Peril, and I was very happy that it was kind of a higher tier of all of them. And it was the first book that I enjoyed. There's a secondary character, Michael Carpenter, that you meet here that I really enjoyed. We got Vampire Court. We got Ghosts. We got a lot of action. But the thing that I learned in Butcher shows early on in the series is one thing he's very good about action is just pacing it. The action sequences never feel like they're too long. He seems to just instinctively know when to move on from an action sequence. So although this book did have a lot of action, I did feel that it never overstayed its welcome and just kind of flowed really well. It was some really, really great plotting. And Grave Peril was the first time I said, okay, maybe I'm going to continue with this series. So the next book is called Summer Night, and the thing about Summer Night that's enjoyable for me is that you get to see the fairy courts, which not a lot of people like that, but I do like the fairy courts. They're just a lot of intrigue and kind of a different kind of political intrigue that I really enjoy, and I enjoy kind of political intrigue in all kinds of fiction, but especially in fantasy. But it's probably not as good as Grave Peril is what I have for my notes here, because the story itself was maybe a bit more mundane than Grave Peril, but I enjoyed that part of it. Incidentally, this is also the first one that I listened to via audiobook, and I saw the appeal there. So out of I think it's 18 books of Dresden, I think I've read exactly 9 of them with my eyes and listened to 9 of them via audiobook. And I do enjoy the audiobooks quite a bit. They're very entertaining, and Marsters does a great job. So Summer Night, another kind of B-tier book, but it wasn't nearly as good as Grave Peril in my mind. So when I got to Death Masks, that was the 5th one. This one became my favorite Dresden novel at the time. And this is the first time that I really saw what Butcher was doing from a world-building perspective, how he just kept layering these things. Like Stormfront was our introduction to kind of Harry and just this magical world of Chicago. And then we get werewolves, and then we get vampires, and then we get fairy court. And we start to see how all these things are layering on top of one another. And Death Masks was really, really great. We get Harry's kind of lover at a time. Susan Rodriguez comes back into the story. We get vampires. We get the Shroud of Turin plays into this one. So I do like when they lean into a lot of the kind of the real world type things. But Death Masks was my favorite 5 books in. And then we go to Blood Rights. This is another B-tier one. I can see why people would probably put this at the bottom. I'm going to put it a little ahead of Summer Night, but maybe not up to Grave Peril. Some things I really enjoyed about this one is that the story itself was not great, and there are some aspects of the story I didn't like, but the kind of the personal repercussions that happens to Harry here, how it's intertwined with at least one other character here, for me, really elevated this story and made it very, very important in the grand scope of things. Even if the book itself was maybe not the best one in the series, it's still solid B tier and just had some important things going forward. Now, going forward, Deadbeat is awesome. Now, at the time, I thought Deadbeat was an S tier, but was an S tier Dresden book. But now that I've got caught up, I realize that I think Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to tag you. I think Jake calls this false peak, where you think, oh, we've made it, and Deadbeat, as amazing as it is going to be one of the best. Well, you're going to see there's a lot of S-tier books that I put ahead of Deadbeat, but Deadbeat was amazing. We get Waldo Butters. We get some big things that happen where one of the things I love in this series is sometimes you see the whole story and then there's a plot twist that makes you want to go back and reread everything. And there's one here which is just absolutely incredible. There is an incredible scene with an inanimate object that made me cheer out loud on a public bus, and the plotting and pacing was incredible. Necromancers, I mean, it's a home run of a book, but it's not quite S tier, which at the time, if you told me like Deadbeat is not an S tier Dresden book, I would have been shocked. But as I got further in the series, I realized that that's pretty true. But Deadbeat was a fantastic one. So the next one is called Proven Guilty. And Proven Guilty is the next time that I thought I might quit the series. It's B tier though. I think I'm going to put it bottom of B tier. B tier. It starts with Michael Carpenter's daughter Molly being in trouble, and in many ways the book kind of felt like a setup book. But there's a scene at the end of here I found so repugnant that this is one that I was reading this one on my Kindle, and had I been reading a real book, I might have thrown it across the room, because there's a scene at the end of this book that it made me very angry. I know at least one other reader that quit the series right at that point. I didn't quit the series, but I was kind of nervous going forward with some things. And I mean, there's still some aspect of the series that I don't love, but the scene at the end of Proven Guilty is definitely a low point for me in this book series. So let's go to White Knight. This is a bounce back book. Probably not as good as Deadbeat, but the thing that starts to happen, and I'll probably say this several times for the rest of this video, is Butcher just keeps raising the stakes. And that's kind of what you get here with White Knight. And the ending of this book is just tremendous. So White Knight, maybe not up to the level of Deadbeat, but solid A tier, kind of recovers from maybe a lesser installment of Proven Guilty, but I really enjoyed White Knight and where it was pointing things. And then we get to Small Favor. Small Favor for me is the first S tier Dresden book. Small Favor is incredible. It is literally Harry owes a favor to the White Court, and the White Court, when you have favors and contracts and everything, they take those things very, very seriously. And this is one of those wall-to-wall action books, but the thing that, for me, that made Small Favor so good and makes it one of the best is that within all of the action in Small Favor are all of these truly significant character moments for Harry and the secondary characters. And what I really enjoyed in this is that there were probably like 5 or 6 of them. And as good as the action was, those scenes for me make this an S tier book. And now, if you haven't read the series, you're saying, what, I have to read, how many books are out there? 10? Is that the 10th book? 10 books to get to an S tier. It's worth it because all of these secondary characters and Harry, you've lived with them for a while and you've come to these moments, and I just found them just truly significant and such a great portion of the series. So Small Favor, S tier for sure. So the next one's Turncoat. So Turncoat is an A tier book for me, maybe not at the level of Deadbeat, and I could honestly see someone making this an S tier as well as Deadbeat. I'm not the expert. Like, this is not the definitive tier ranking list here. This is just my tier ranking. My only problem with Turncoat is that it was predictable. There were 2 plot points I predicted very early on, and I hoped that I was going to be wrong, and I wasn't. So I didn't like that. One thing I love, though, that in this book, you start to see that Butcher doesn't mess around in jumping into the main story. Like, the story happens in the first paragraph of the book. There's no preamble. It just, like, jumps in. Literally, someone shows up at Harry's door, and the plot gets going. And it didn't quit. So I really enjoyed that. But the ending was good. Maybe not a great ending. Definitely not a happy ending, but a good ending to it. And it's clearly an A tier book, but a little too predictable for me to make it an S tier book. All right, and then we hit Changes. So Changes is one of those books that is extremely hyped by the fandom, and for me, it's a book that lived up to the hype. Changes, literally everything changes in this series. I mentioned earlier how the stakes just start to rise in this book series, and we hit to Changes, and things are different from this point forward. It's not just a clever title of a book, but you also see the title itself has changed. If you look at all of the previous books, all of them are 2 words, and they're the same numbers of letters for each word. Well, Changes, we got a single word, but everything changes in this one. It is super high stakes and such a memorable book. The convergence at the end was huge, and just the stakes. And you realize going forward, even without the last chapter, you realize that things are going to be different going forward. And the penultimate chapter of this book ends with the most significant thing that has happened in this series up to this point. And you could say arguably is the most significant thing that happens in the series, period, up to this point. Although there's one in Battleground that you could argue, and I would probably even say this is a more impactful moment, but this is huge. And the very end of that penultimate chapter, just, oh my goodness, it's so strong, so strong. And Changes is top of the S tier for me, absolutely, at least up to this point. We'll see if any of the 5 above this reach that height. Well, Ghost Story, I also think is an S tier book. Ghost Story is a smaller story, and I think it's needed because Changes is such a big story and has pretty much every secondary character in there. Big stakes, huge ending. Ghost Story is a smaller story, and the inclusion of which secondary characters make it perhaps more significant of who the secondary characters are. And in many ways, this is kind of a way that Butcher steps back and just treats Harry as a character and gives you a bit of a character study. It's a smaller story, but I think it was much needed after Changes, and I thought it was S tier. I think that it was definitely a great story in and of itself. So then we get to Cold Days. Well, Cold Days, here we go again, another S tier. They just become great at this point. So Cold Days, again, he raises the stakes. And one of the things I like in this is I love seeing the growth of Harry. Well, here, Harry is, and again, I'm spoiler free, he's in a new role. He has a new kind of job position, you can say. And in this position, this is the book where he has to kind of learn how to adapt to this position. So he's not only dealing with like the outward side of what he has to do, like the actions he has to take to fulfill this role, but inwardly trying to figure out how he's going to fulfill this role that he doesn't want, but still remain true to himself, and dealing with different aspects of the powers that he's received because of this new position that he has. It was fantastic. There's some great things in kind of some political nature in this one that are intertwined to this position he has. But Cold Days is another S tier, and I could see why this point where everyone says Changes at the end is all S tier. I don't think so. You're going to see that not all of these last 3 are S tier for me, but you see that the trajectory, the series has certainly gone up. So what do we got next? We have Skin Game. So Skin Game is the one on Goodreads with the highest composite average. I'm going to put it second. I think it's amazing. And if you say it's your favorite, like, I'm not going to disagree with you, because I think the difference between Changes and Skin Game from a quality standpoint are very, very small. In fact, it's October. Like, if I were shooting my end of the year Red Fury Book Awards for my best books I read in 2025, both of those books are finalists because they're both in the top like 5 books that I read this year. Skin Game is incredible. Harry finds himself again in a situation he doesn't want to be, but he has to for certain obligations that he has. There's he's kind of a reluctant hero here. We got a motley crew where he's on a heist, and the people that he's on this heist with, he doesn't want to have anything to do with any of them, but he has to be part of it. And what they have to steal is monumental. It's huge, and it's incredible. And you have the greatest antagonist in this series, probably in this book, which we've seen him before, but kind of, permeates through all of this. The ending was incredible. It's just one of those books. It was a hell of a ride. But it, just like when I was talking about Small Favor, the thing about Skin Game that really got me were these smaller character moments. There are some truly significant ones in here that'll likely make even the most stoic readers tear up a little bit. There's 2 in particular. One has to deal with fatherhood and one has to deal with friendship that are just, they're so heartfelt. And for me, those are the highs of the series, not the big action. Like, Skin Game has incredible action sequences. Tremendous. I mean, a couple, again, I just want to cheer out loud. But for me, it's the smaller character moments in Skin Game that just make this such a incredible, incredible book. Now, the last 2 books, Peace Talks and Battleground, these 2 books were originally one book, and they were split apart by the publisher. I think it had something to do with, at the time, it was lockdown, and we had dealing with like shortage of printing, so like page cost and things like that. So I think that was the reason they broke it in half, and I think that was to both books' detriment, because in many ways Peace Talks is a setup book and Battleground is the conclusion of that setup. So Peace Talks, I'm going to put it down in the B tier, probably the top of the B tier, because of that, because it doesn't have the payoff. It is the setup. I mean, it's true to its story. I mean, it is Peace Talks, and that's the bulk of this book, but the ending doesn't give you any resolution. You can tell that it's just a story cut in half, so it's hard for me to put it on a higher tier, because it's an unresolved story. The story itself is great, the setup is great, but it's unresolved, and it gets resolved in Battleground. And probably one of my unpopular placements on this book is I'm only going to put Battleground in the A tier rather than the S tier. And the reason is it is a wall-to-wall action, and that's not my thing. Well, some of these others were almost wall-to-wall action. Changes, Skin Game, Small Favor had a lot of action in there, but I felt that a lot of the softer and smaller moments in Battleground just didn't have the significance as in those other books that I mentioned. However, there's one real big one. There's one huge thing that happens in this book that may be the most impactful sequence. So if that causes someone to make it S tier in their mind, I'm not going to disagree with them. But for me, Battleground, because it was, again, just the second half of the book, of the story that was started in Peace Talks, for me, it doesn't reach that S tier feeling for me. I wonder, though, like, those two books as one big, huge, epic novel, I think is probably an S-tier book, because then instead of Battleground being 90% of a single book where it's just action, 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 it's more like 45% of the last half of a book. And that big moment probably happening at the 80% of the book, it probably is going to hit a bit different than how it is split up. So I'm going to place it as just the A tier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. I've kept it spoiler-free, and I hope that you've enjoyed that aspect of the spoiler-free, but here is my ranking of the Dresden Files. I can't wait to read 12 Months in January with everybody. I'm all caught up. And then I can't wait till the book after that, because probably what I'll do is I'll reread all of these like I see everybody doing. Like I saw Ben on GOODREADS marked. He had read one of them, and it was like his third or fourth time reading the book. So I look forward to doing that and knowing the trajectory of the series, going back and maybe even revisiting the tier ranking and seeing how some of these change with my knowledge of the end of the series. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tier ranking list. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.